What's up, guys? It's your boy Chrysalis here. Why are you leaning? And today we're gonna do something a little different. I guess you could technically consider this to be react content, I guess. The good people at IndieWire published an article about over 35 movies that director Paul Thomas Anderson thinks that you should watch. These are outlined as his favorite films that he feels like more people should see. So I'm going to go through the list and comment on what he thinks about the movie, as well as just my own personal thoughts about the film as well, on the assumption that it's a movie that I have seen or at least familiar with. But before I get into that, I'm just going to let you guys know I don't think I'm going to be doing the video about everything that I watched at home in August. I'm just not really feeling making that video, so yeah, I'm just gonna, from here on in, focus on movies that I'm watching at theaters. And the most you're gonna get out of me when it comes to just at-home watching is either when I'm doing a filmography overview, or if I'm giving you my thoughts on a piece of my Criterion collection. But if you are curious as to what I am watching on my own free time, I will leave a link in the description for my Letterboxd. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump into this. I will also be leaving a link in the description for this article as well, so you can read along with it yourself or what have you. So as I mentioned, I have not watched a lot of these movies, or I've heard of a lot of these movies, so a movie like Something Wild, I'm not gonna have like any input on, since I don't know. Quentin Tarantino's The Hateful Eight. This is a good movie. So in the article, he mentions how he praised Tarantino's use of 70mm film in order to kind of enlarge the scope of what's kind of like a pretty secluded movie. He also just praised the hell out of Samuel L. Jackson because, you know, it's Samuel fucking Jackson. Which I definitely agree with. In hindsight, I never really thought about like the fact that he used 70mm to make The Hateful Eight the way it ended up being. Because now I'm thinking about it, like all the scenes in the film just feel pretty tall and wide. Mind you, it's definitely been a hot minute since I've watched The Hateful Eight, but you know, nevertheless, I thought that was interesting. He also mentions his love for Big Daddy, which I'm not really surprised by. Paul Thomas Anderson has had a deep love for movies with Adam Sandler in it for a hot minute. His love for Adam Sandler is essentially why he wanted to make Punch Drunk Love, and yeah, the world's better for it that we have that movie. So shout out to Big Daddy. Yeah, the articles in some of these just talks about the time when Paul Thomas Anderson went on a Reddit Ask Me Anything and just declared like certain things his favorite movie. Like right here, he talks about his love for Blue Velvet and Wild at Heart. Specifically his two favorite David Lynch's. And I have not watched Blue Velvet, so I don't really have anything else to add from there. I am going to watch it very soon, though. Call Me By Your Name. Also, once again, a Reddit AMA he did to promote Phantom Thread. The article doesn't really mention a whole lot of input from Paul Thomas Anderson himself, which kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit, but Call Me By Your Name is a great film if you're looking for a gay, romantic, coming-of-age type of movie. And also, just without needing to say anything, one of Timothée Chalamet's best performances, like, ever. It also does a great job at just presenting this portrait that, while it's romantic, it's also problematic, since Chalamet's character is presented to be 17, and Armie Hammer's character is like in his 20s or something. I think back to when I was watching, I think it was Simon Pegg's Criterion Closet video, where he mentions that a movie entertaining you is kind of an overrated aspect of art. Sometimes art needs to present you with something that is supposed to like challenge like your worldview, or at least present to you like an ugly side of the world or whatever. And no one sane person is going to feel a certain way about a movie like Call Me By Your Name. So in a lot of ways, Luca Guadagnino kind of just, did a great job at giving us that type of portrait. So the article also mentions 4 movies from the GOAT Stanley Kubrick. In particular, he talked about the time where he visited the set of Eyes Wide Shut to meet with Tom Cruise, who at that point had already starred in Magnolia or was about to be in Magnolia. In the article here, Anderson was actually perplexed by the fact that Kubrick had such a small crew, and when he asked Kubrick why he works with so few people, Kubrick was just like, well, how many people do you need? But in particular, he had a difficult time naming like a favorite Stanley Kubrick of his. It ended up being this 4-way of Dr. Strangelove, Lolita, Full Metal Jacket, and The Shining. And don't kill me, but I've only watched Dr. Strangelove in full. I've seen bits and pieces of The Shining and Full Metal Jacket, and Lolita will eventually be a film I watch eventually. I'll probably end up watching all of Stanley Kubrick's in time. But I had a thought about Dr. Strangelove recently, given the fact that Paul Thomas Anderson has a new movie coming out called One Battle After Another, which you should definitely go see on opening weekend of the 26th of September of 2025. But from what is being described about the film, since people were able to get a early access look of the movie somewhat recently, it was being compared to Dr. Strangelove in that there's just a lot of dystopian, just worst case scenarios happening in the film, but it's presented in such a black comedy, absurdist way that you can't help but laugh. And if you don't laugh, it's like you're kind of just side-eyeing, like, what the fuck is going on? Because that's exactly how I feel about Dr. Strangelove, about how this whole thing with like the nuclear Armageddon is happening, and all this silly shit just keeps happening. Which in a sense, I guess, is just satire that Kubrick just nailed, like, directly on the head for sure. So another movie he mentions is Christopher Nolan's Dunkirk. Since he's good friends with Christopher Nolan, he's actually able to watch Christopher Nolan movies the way they are meant to be watched, basically just, as it says in the article, hot off the presses. For him, it was one of those movies where he was watching it thinking, how the fuck did he do that? And yeah, that's kind of how I feel about Dunkirk. That's actually how I feel about just about every Christopher Nolan movie. Like, how, without the use of CGI, or at least the minimal use of CGI, how exactly did he make that happen? I remember when Oppenheimer was coming out, everyone was very concerned and just very curious as to how he was going to make the test of the Trinity project happen. And it ended up being this like huge, elaborate, like explosive cocktail that was really interesting. And in hindsight, there's a lot of shit that happens in Dunkirk that, in retrospect, I do feel similar to Paul Thomas Anderson. Like, how did he make all this happen? He also mentions Girls Trip, which, in my humble opinion, that movie's just fine. That movie's just okay. I won't necessarily call it bad or anything. I don't think it's bad at all. I thought it was fine myself. But more specifically, after he watched Girl Trip, he really wanted to work with Tiffany Haddish at some point. I will say, in hindsight, Tiffany Haddish is probably the highlight of that movie. Ah yes, Get Out. Jordan Peele's Get Out. He greatly appreciates Get Out for the fact that when he was just lost and he needed some inspiration, Get Out just gave him a swift kick in the rear in a lot of good ways. I enjoyed Get Out. Get Out was fantastic. I need to rewatch it at some point. I didn't get the chance to see it in theaters, and I kind of wish I did, but I could definitely see like why it made so many waves, considering how just immaculately well it handles the plot twist and just like the tension and the pacing and everything around it. Mikhail Kalatozov's I Am Cuba. I have not watched it yet, but it's literally on my wish list. I'm gonna watch it eventually. I just wanted to point that one out, that he mentions I Am Cuba because apparently a lot of the visuals and everything else about the film is just so good, and yeah, I can't wait to watch it eventually. He also mentions Jaws because, you know, it's Jaws. He mentions that it was one of a handful of movies along with The Wizard of Oz that he rewatched endlessly as a child. I think this part of the article just more so mentions how big of an influence Jaws was to him, along with a lot of other filmmakers when it came out. I mentioned this in another video, but I watched Jaws in IMAX recently, and even to this day, it still holds up 50 years later, which is insane to think about. He mentions Greta Gerwig's Lady Bird, which I'm definitely due for a rewatch at some point. Funny story, Phantom Thread faced off against Lady Bird during the Oscars for Best Picture. He was very impressed with Greta Gerwig and Saoirse Ronan's director actor companionship and just synchronicity. More specifically, how did this actress from Ireland convince everyone else watching this movie that she's a teenager from California? Which it definitely fooled me, considering how little I knew about Saoirse Ronan at the time when I watched it. And also, that's just honestly just a top-notch, top-tier performance overall as well. Lady Bird made me a Greta Gerwig believer, at least in terms of her directing. I don't think I ever watched anything she was in as an actress before that point. Mind you, I did eventually watch Frances Ha, of course, but as far as before watching Frances Ha, around that time when I did watch Lady Bird, I have not watched any of Greta Gerwig's acting performances. He mentions his own movie, The Master, which is pretty interesting. I guess he was asked which of his own movies are his favorite, and he mentions The Master. I have not watched The Master yet, but I'm going to. It's on the agenda. I'm going to try to watch all of his movies before the new movie, One Battle After Another, coming out. But it is interesting to hear his perspective on that. How for a lot of personal reasons as well as technical reasons, that ended up being his favorite film that he ever made. He also mentions the Mission Impossible franchise, which, fair. In addition to having an obsession with Adam Sandler, he also has an obsession with Tom Cruise, which explains why Tom Cruise ended up in Magnolia. I'll be honest, you are doing yourself a disservice if you've not watched the Mission Impossible franchise. I will say there's the good times, bad times, and the ugly times in the franchise, but even with Mission Impossible 2 in mind, I can definitely say that it's probably largely one of the most consistent, long-running action franchises that I can think of. And now that I'm thinking about it, I was sitting in the theater watching Mission Impossible Final Reckoning sometime back, and it just does such a phenomenal job at just wrapping up the entire franchise in this one huge bow. And part of me just feels sad that that's the end of an era and that we're never going to get those types of movies from Tom Cruise and just in general again. I mean, obviously we're still going to get, action films with Tom Cruise in it, but specifically the Mission Impossible, it's just sucks to see that go. He also mentions both of Barry Jenkins' great movies, Moonlight and If Beale Street Could Talk. In particular, Anderson believed that Barry Jenkins was just phenomenally good at just the art of the close-up, which, when you think about it, is true, especially when you think about Moonlight. There's just so many just impeccable moments in that movie, and a lot of the ones that stick out in my mind are just these close-ups of actors. How Barry was just able to capture all of the expressions on all the characters' faces and everything, no matter what it is that's happening. In a lot of ways, that's probably an underrated feature as to why Moonlight was just as fucking amazing as it was. So he mentions Robert Altman's Nashville. I did a whole video about Nashville. I'm going to link that in the description. But in particular, Anderson names it as Robert Altman's best movie, and that he dedicated There Will Be Blood to Robert Altman, since I think around that time, when he was making There Will Be Blood, he passed, which makes sense. He also mentions John Krasinski's A Quiet Place, which in my opinion, pretty solid movie. It definitely felt more like a movie that you should definitely watch in the theater, even if at the end of it just got shooty shoot. But in particular, the article mentions how he was able to get in touch with Krasinski, Paul Thomas Anderson, I mean, just to rave at how just phenomenal of a job he did. He also mentions Rain Man, which, again, movie with Tom Cruise, so it's not that surprising. I do need to rewatch Rain Man at some point because I am wondering how well it aged or how horribly it aged, especially given how Dustin Hoffman plays an autistic individual, or at least the film's portrayal of autism in the movie. He also mentions Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water, which I think was another movie that he was up against during the Oscars, which, he lost to. The Shape of Water actually ended up winning Best Picture that year, which I was very happy about when I first watched it, and I watched the Oscars as well. In particular, though, Paul Thomas Anderson praises Sally Hawkins' phenomenal performance in The Shape of Water. But when I think about The Shape of Water, I think of two things. One, the sea creature, obviously, and two, Sally Hawkins just doing a phenomenal job playing a deaf woman that just wants to take care of the fish creature and loves the fish creature. He also mentions The Silence of the Lambs, which, I mean, is just a phenomenal fucking movie, so yeah. So the article, Anderson mentions his love for Jonathan Demme and his visual style and everything. Actually, in the article when he was talking about Barry Jenkins' use of close-ups, he also mentions Jonathan Demme in that same breath as well. Oh yeah, here. Mainly Demme's tight close-ups and choice to have the characters look directly into the camera during conversation scenes. Yeah, so he loves Jonathan Demme's close-ups, that's for certain. There's actually more films in the article, obviously, that I was not able to really give my input on, so again, a link in the description for the article will be in the description. Yeah, I'm repeating myself. I thought this was an interesting read for sure. I'm always very curious as to what movies influence filmmakers and what movies ended up just touching filmmakers in such a way that they end up just leaving a lasting impression on them. And also the why, right? Why was Jonathan Demme so influential for Paul Thomas Anderson? Why does he love both Tom Cruise and Adam Sandler so much? I'm always very curious about things like that, so this was an interesting read, and I definitely enjoyed giving my thoughts on it. Anyway, if you've given this article a read, tell me your thoughts on it. Were there movies that you were surprised that were mentioned in this article? I was very surprised by Girls Trip. I did not expect that at all. Or are you like a Paul Thomas Anderson buff and like literally none of this surprised you in any way, shape, or form? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're there, considering hitting like and subscribe as well. This is your boy Chrysalis here, signing off.